House is a organization that creates little networks of homes in different cities throughout the world. The residents of those homes welcome people into their house, and I'm sure it's a little different now with COVID-19, but to do Jewish programming from Shabbat dinners to holiday dinners to meditation, and it's a really nice network, and they're across the United States and around the world. When I was visiting the Jewish community down in Argentina, we went to a Moshe house there. I know there's a lot in Brooklyn, and it's just a really wonderful organization. You should definitely check that out, and if you don't know about them. So we are in for a treat as Rabbi Bernstein teaches us about comics and Judaism. This is always good because I don't know anything about this, so I'm going to learn with all of you. If you have any questions, you can, of course, write them in the chat box, and I'll moderate the chat box. And there'll also be opportunity for unmuting yourself if you want during the experience and learning as well. So welcome, and Rabbi Bernstein, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Both Ethan and Rabbi Brandstein. I hope everyone knows that in rabbinical school, it's basically just a bunch of really nice people. You know, like every now and then you get a sort of exception to that rule, but for the most part, rabbinical school is a lot of really sweet people. And even among all of them, Rabbi Ethan always stood out as sort of like one of the mensches among mensches. And I'm sure you all know from having him as your head rabbi, someone who just is always so pleasant to be able to interact with and learn with. And so thank you so much for bringing me in, Ethan, and for that warm introduction. I'm really excited to do this with you. This is kind of, you're my guinea pigs. This is a chance to do something that I've wanted to teach for so long. And this is honestly my first time getting to do this in this organized way. I've taught it in other fields, but I'm really excited for that. So what I would love to do to start actually is just to get a sense. We're going to be looking at Judaism in comic books. Some of you may know a lot about Judaism. Some of you may know a lot about comics. Some of you may not know much about either. Who knows? So what I would just love to know is when I say Judaism in comic books, and I'd love to hear from maybe no more than 4 or 5, but if people just want to unmute themselves and participate, what do you think of when I say Judaism in comic books, right? And that
Cavalier and Clay.
Oh, great. Who just said that?
Janice did.
Janice, would you mind just saying like a word more on that phrase you just said?
It's about the Jewish immigrants who came to this country and started writing comics like Superman and so on.
Ethan, your face is in?
Yeah, great. Yes, so we have a Michael Chabon novel about Jewish immigrants that created fictional comic book characters. What else do we have when you think Judaism in comics?
I see Ethan someone there.
Oh, sorry.
Oops, sorry, okay. I think the name says Steven Lieberman. I heard something coming from there.
It's Hannah. Mad Magazine.
Mad Magazine. Okay, great. So we're going back to, I think that's what Kurtzman, is it?
Mort Drucker, and I can't remember who else.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Great stuff.
Amazing.
Oh,
and
well, the creators of Superman, Schuster and Siegel, were Jewish, and Ben Grimm, who's one of the Fantastic Four, was also he was a Jewish character.
Wonderful. We'll actually be getting right into that, Scott, in a little bit. So thank you for bringing that up. Maybe just one.
Stan Lee.
And Stan Lee.
Stan Lee.
Stan Lee, of course. Stan Lee, who Stan Lee has become an icon to whole new generations through his involvement in what's known as the MCU movies or the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. So the big blockbusters that come out every summer and April and winter. Stan Lee had these guest appearances up until his death in 2018. Great. So
we have one more. Leslie had her hand.
Leslie,
right. I don't know. I kind of took off the video. I don't know how to turn it back on.
No, you're on. You're on.
Oh, okay. Then there's Superman. Who, as our book club has discussed, kind of extrapolated by what's his name, who wrote it. He got it from the Golem, the traditional folk super person.
Great.
And so Superman is a more attractive, wishful thinking on the part of what's his name, who wrote it.
Yeah, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were the creators.
Yeah,
Right.
Gary Siegel and Josh.
Who got screwed anyway out of the money, but anyway.
Yes, indeed. So
So
we
much for
have,
Superman.
why not settle for both strength and beauty at the same time? It was real Jewish wish fulfillment. Thank you all very much. So as I'm sure you've seen coming up, usually when we talk about Judaism in comic books, the conversation hinges more in the direction of, or hews to the direction of, who are the creators? Oh, look at how many Jewish creators we have. Did you know that Bob Kane and Bill Finger, who created Batman, were also Jewish? Did you know Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who created most of the Marvel Universe, they were Jewish? As we said, Superman created to be Jewish. Or we're talking in the realm of metaphor. Superman actually represents Moses, because Moses was a baby placed in a basket and sent down to save his people, sent down a river, and Superman was placed in a rocket ship that was like his basket and sent away from an exploding planet to save a group of enslaved people or to save a planet. So we're usually in the realm, like I said, of metaphor or of creators. A little over 2 years ago, my friend Henry Bernstein and I, no relation, were having a conversation, and we both simultaneously were coming to the same thought, which was, boy, you know what I'd rather talk about personally is not who are the Jewish creators, but what do American Jewish comic book writers do when they're representing Judaism in the pages themselves? Not metaphorically, not secretly, when there is explicit expressions of Judaism within the pages of mainstream comic books. Now, if any of you are comic book scholars or somewhat familiar, you may know that the first ever graphic novel was created by a guy named Will Eisner, once again, Jewish, and Will Eisner's graphic novel, which is sort of an adult term used for a longer comic book that usually, you know, it would be a novel, except it also happens to be illustrated. The first ever graphic novel was called A Contract with God, and it was all about Jews in tenement housing in the Lower East Side of New York. And the title story was about a man who created his own covenant or brit with God, and he went from basically being a chassid, he like is dressed the way that a chassid in Muncie would be dressed, to being a proper businessman until God betrays the terms of the covenant. So there's that, yes. But what Henry and I were interested in was what happens in the mainstream, right? In the same way that maybe you've been to sessions that look at Judaism in TV and everyone's talking about Unorthodox on Netflix, or everybody is talking about Transparent when it was big for a few years, right? Like, oh my gosh, that's the Jewish life I live happening on a screen. Henry and I were interested in, well, what happens when it happens in comic books? Because we love comic books and there's something powerful about acts of representation. What happens when I read a comic book and I see that's me on the page, right? When you think of superheroes and you picture Captain America who fought the Nazis but was also blonde-haired and blue-eyed, right? There's this sort of thing of like, that's distant from me. Spider-Man wears a mask, and the power of that mask is to say anyone could be that character. Maybe that could be me. But when I see a character wear a yarmulke in a comic book, there's something that speaks to me in a different way. And so Henry and I began this endeavor. We basically made a podcast, and we called that podcast, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Dun, 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 although you should know it because it's the name of the presentation. Funny, they don't look Jewish. And so here's me and Henry all comicified, but just wanted that as a sort of intro slide. So what I wanted us to do tonight is to look very quickly at first at some brief examples of Judaism in the comic book annals. And then I wanted us to look more closely at two in particular. And I don't remember if I had this habit in rabbinical school or not, so Rabbi Ethan can confirm or deny. I always tend to prepare too much, so we'll see how much we actually manage to get through. All right, so here's where I would love to start. I just want to start off by showing you three images of three different characters that I found, again, surprising that they were existing in mainstream comic books. So Marvel Comics, same as the Marvel movies, one of their properties is this group of characters called the X-Men. And in roughly the end of 2001, a significant member of the team, Colossus, ends up dying. Now, a year later, there's an issue of a comic book called X-Men Unlimited that comes out. Sorry, I just need to, there we go. And it's a year later, and Kitty Pryde is a Jewish character, goes by the name of Shadowcat, has been Jewish since she debuted in, I believe, 1980. And as you can see, she is lighting a yahrzeit candle and an entire issue titled Yahrzeit in remembrance of her friend. And this is indeed published at about the year anniversary of the character's death. So in September 2002, we have a comic book where an explicitly Jewish character lights a yahrzeit candle, and the entire issue is told by the frame device of repeatedly checking back in on that yahrzeit candle and seeing as it burns down. Right? An entire comic book told through the framing of seeing what this day of difficult mourning and remembrance is for her. I was flabbergasted when I looked back and realized that there was, again, a comic. For us, it's amazing. Imagine being someone not Jewish and picking up and saying, what's this weird title? What is going on here? So that's one instance. I believe what we're going to have next is a character from DC by the name of Colossal Boy. Colossal Boy is a character from a group called the Legion of Superheroes. The Legion of Superheroes were created, I believe, back in the 50s even. And they are an imaginary group of superheroes from the 31st century, so far, far into the future, 1,000 years in the future. And from these Legion of Superheroes, they're from all different planets. For any of you who watch Star Trek and are Trekkies, it's kind of like the Federation of Planets that are all represented. And one of the characters from Earth is Colossal Boy. As you can maybe guess from his name, he grows, he shrinks, he can become colossal. His name is Gim Alone, or perhaps Jim Alone. It's G-I-M. I'm not fully sure on the pronunciation. Gim Alone. And Paul Levitz, who is the Jewish writer who primarily worked with him back in the 60s, is looking at that name Gim Alone and says, boy, that really reminds me of Yigal Alone, who was actually an Israeli military commander that you may or may not be familiar with. And he says, well, if Alone's Israeli and Jewish, then this hero will be Jewish. And in the, I believe it was in the early 80s or late 70s, it was like 79 or 80, he officially and canonically makes Colossal Boy a Jewish character. And here you have him explaining to a character from another planet. They were talking about whether or not he had to go to Sunday dinner or Sunday dinner with the family. And he says, actually, my tribe calls it Sabbath dinner, and it was Friday night. So you see him talking about Shabbat. Fun fact, the character's mother, even before he was Jewish, was the president of the entire earth. Again, it's not countries, it's whole planets, which also means A, Judaism survives another 1,000 years into the 31st century, and B, a Jewish woman is president of the entire planet. Pretty cool. It's a fictional world I like to live in. And later on in the same issue, we get this amazing panel where he and his wife, who is an alien, and there was actually an issue that confronted it and had issues of interfaith relationships, except sci-fi-ified essentially by making it an alien. And they're coming to visit his mother, and they're sitting down. You may be able to recognize it's Shabbat dinner. We have our Shabbat candles. We have our Kiddush cup. We've got the challah covered. It's a blink and you miss it panel that for other people wouldn't matter. And for me and Henry, and hopefully for you, I don't quite know how to explain, and we're going to get into some text and discussion, but like just seeing these images again, they bring me a joy I don't know how to describe. Hopefully you're seeing some of it also. The final quick character I want to show you is a character named Moon Knight. He's also from Marvel. There's the two competitors, Marvel and DC. Marvel publishes Moon Knight. He dresses in all white. He was established as Jewish in the 80s through a writer. He's actually one of the only characters I know of who was written by a rabbi, Rabbi Alan Zelenitz, if anyone's familiar with Rabbi Zelenitz, who also works in Hollywood now, I believe. So in a modern issue, in number 194 that came out in 2018, in an issue of Moon Knight, we had Moon Knight reflecting on how his Judaism impacted him growing up, and thus we have him thinking back to the history of the Jews, and you see Moon Knight giving this funky thumbs up in front of Moses about to break the tablets. And then the next issue, the next image is actually the one that started for me this whole endeavor Henry and I went down. An imagination in which his cape becomes a tallis, and you can see him wearing a shtreimel and sort of having his payas coming down. And that mixture of visibly Jewish and superhero is just like, again, there's something about the visual medium that it's striking to read. The issue gets funky. I don't want to spend too much time in it. I just wanted to show you, these are some examples of things that, again, just reviewing, this was 2002, 2010, 2018, but we've even had some earlier examples. So the first person I really want us to dive into, I believe Scott mentioned for us, it was a character known as The Thing, Benjamin J. Grimm, one of a a group of heroes called the Fantastic Four. They were 4 people exposed to cosmic rays. They all gained powers. And poor Ben Grimm, his hide became rocky and horrendous, and he was just a thing rather than a person. So he's called the Thing. He has this tough attitude, sort of like a Lower East Side hoodlum to a certain degree. And as I believe Scott hinted also, it was always implied that he was Jewish, but it wasn't yet canonical. But really neat thing, in 1976, Jack Kirby, the Jewish artist who was the creator of the Fantastic Four and so many other Marvel characters, sent out this personalized Hanukkah card to friends and family that is an image of the Thing, kippah, talis, siddur in hand, menorah lit behind him, and the Hebrew there, it's a little tiny, so in case you can't read, it's ichulim l'Hanukkah, or sort of like hopes and wishes for Hanukkah, right? So even in 1976, Jack Kirby was on record saying this character was always the one of the Fantastic Four that he put the most of himself into. And so as early as the 76, people were wondering, but is the Thing actually Jewish? Is he like Jack Kirby canonically Jewish? So what I want to show us, and I promise that we'll eventually be getting to, actually, before we go on, just to check in, maybe 2 or 3 thoughts. Does anyone just have any reactions, thoughts, or questions they want to ask in general before we dive in a little bit more particularly on the Thing and some of the Jewish content we're going to see on the screen? I would just love to see any if not, no big deal, but just, yeah, I see a hand from Cheryl, and actually, Ethan, if you would mind.
I think Ethan Young, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, that's me. So, yeah, this look into Jewish comic book characters was really interesting for me, and I learned some stuff I never knew before. Also, I wanted to show you this comic book that I was really looking for.
Shalaman, great. Is that an Israeli published or American?
It says Morgan Printing Incorporated. And
Ethan?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I think, Ethan, this is Marilyn. I'm the one who got you that magazine at the Jewish Museum.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah, this was from you.
And I was very surprised when I saw that they had this series of magazines. I'm so glad that you have that.
I'm
Was
still
it-
surprised something like this even exists.
No. Leslie has her hand up. You have to unmute yourself, Leslie. Oh, Leslie, you're muted. Leslie, we can't hear you because you're still.
Oh, there.
There we go.
So many illustrations, I don't know why, but that of illustrators that of Jewish themes that the illustrations are not top notch. So I'm proud to see that how good the illustrations are, the level of quality. I mean, I know there's lots of Jewish illustrators, in the world, around in the general public, but as comics, it's nice to see there's such knowledge of anatomy and drawing skills. So as an artist, I just noticed that.
Yeah, it's great to not be second rate.
Right.
Is that so? A question, I guess. Are the creators drawing these as well, or do they have people that are drawing the? Are they developing the story as well as the drawings, or are they doing just one of them?
Right, great question. Fully depends on the artist. So in comic books in general, it is a collaborative medium. And maybe the best way to show would be, I'm actually gonna move to this next page. So the issue we're gonna dive into is Fantastic Four number 56. But just to show you, we've got Carl Kiesel, who is the writer, meaning that he scripted out the story and probably after seeing it drawn, then added in the actual dialogue and narrative captions. You have Stuart Immonen, who is the penciler, meaning the guy who actually is drawing everything. You have Scott Koblish, who is the inker, meaning he's adding depth and lines to all the work. You have Liquid, a company that is a colorist, adding all the colors. You have Richard Starkings and Albert Duchesne, who are the letterers, meaning that they are adding in the actual words once they've been written. And then you have an editor. So it took this many people working together to create one comic book. That being said, there's certainly very talented artists who are both writer and artist. Frank Miller is an example. I think Jack Kirby occasionally wrote some of his own, though he's known generally as a better drawer, a better artist than a writer. So some take on both, some separate it, What I've mostly found is that we tend to get Jewish content via the writer and not via the artist. And as a result, I didn't bring the examples of it. Sometimes I see things and I'm critiquing it because of how wrong it is, how unrepresentative it is. Often when you see a drawn depiction of Jewish prayer, that tends to be really off. And it tends to look a lot like Christian prayer, just with a Torah there. So that's disappointing. But I've also noticed that things get more accurate over time. This might not be surprising. A theory that I have is that you may or may not have heard the idea that, you know, pre-1967 especially, and pre the 60s in general, Jews in America weren't always quite so vocal. They were more interested in becoming a part of the country and in being accepted and not being those weird immigrants and not being other. And so there wasn't as much direct vocalization of identity. And in the 60s, at the same time that there was a Black Power movement and that there was a women's movement and that there was AIM, the American Indian movement, et cetera, coinciding in the late 60s in 1967 with the Six-Day War and the sort of surge of pride in Israel, I believe that's when we really started to see a shift and Jews publicly self-identifying as such much more often. And similarly related to that, then in the comics, really in the 80s it starts, and then by the 90s and certainly by the 2000s, more and more frequently we see more and more comfort with explicit Jewish content appearing in the panels. So I want to take us in and see a little bit, and I'm eventually going to bring us to actual texts as well as the comics. So just to show in this comic, we have Ben Grimm, The Thing. This is the title page, Remembrance of Things Past. Just because I know that I imagine a lot of you know New York fairly well. Ben Grimm grew up on Yancey Street, which you probably can guess is a fictionalized version of Delancey Street. So already, for any of you who know your landmarks of New York, you can guess what Jewish areas he may or may not have grown up in. And he, in this comic, goes back to a Jewish store owner that he grew up with back when he was a child by the name of Hiram Scheckerberg. Weird last name, but Hiram is a good biblical last name. Some of you may or may not have relatives by the name of Hi, who write short for Hiram. Anyway, so these are our characters. What I wanted to show is, this is the issue that canonically confirmed The Thing is Jewish. So just actually going back a moment, this was August 2002. Characters created in 1961, right? 1961 is created. 1976, we get that card showing maybe he's Jewish. It's not till 2002 that there's in-comic confirmation he's a Jewish character. So, as always happens, he goes and visits his friend Hiram. A supervillain attacks. The supervillain gets taken care of, and you can see Thing coming to check on Hiram Scheckerberg. Better hope Sheck ain't dead, right? Can't tell if he's breathing. Don't hear nothing. Me giving him CPR could crush him. Damn. Where's those cops he called? Sheck could be dying and I can't do nothing. So you can sort of feel the pathos of him worried his friend's gonna die. He can't do anything. And then this next panel is kind of stunning. No, there is one thing. Can I actually get a volunteer to read this? I'm gonna move my screen out of the way just in case. Ethan, can we pick someone to maybe read it? Or
yeah. Janice, can you unmute yourself?
Go ahead and read. Start from no, there's one thing.
No, there is one thing. Let's see. Been a while. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed.
Great. Thank you, Janice. So just to make sure that it's there, characters saying he might die, there's nothing I can do. Wait, there's one thing I can do. And then he chooses to recite the Shema, right? This is the moment that reveals the character's Jewish. It's followed up by Hiram getting up, saying, enough, Benjamin. Next, you'll be getting your hoodlum friends to say Kaddish for me. I'm still alive. I'm not dead, right? So there's some nice humor to the issue. But I just wanted to bring this up because, again, it's fascinating to see the words of the Shema printed out in this comic book in this monthly superhero adventure. And what I thought we would do now is transition and just look really quick, just in case people don't know, why would he be reciting Shema, right? What would be the reason for reciting it? So actually, maybe before we get into that, anyone know why when he thinks his friend is dying, when he thinks Mr. Scheckerberg's dying, why would he go to the Shema?
He's asking for a helping hand from God.
Okay, great. So we've got a possibility of he's asking for a helping hand. Just he doesn't know what else to do, so it's the thing that Jews know, and so he's going to recite it to have a connection. Other thoughts?
No.
I see Leslie having her hand up.
Okay.
Great. Leslie, you're on mute again.
She's trying, I think.
Okay. Great.
Janice, do you want to say, and then Leslie will come back?
Well, he could be connecting to like the priest saying the last rites. He's
Great.
sort
Can
of
you-
mixing the two together. So he wants to say something before he dies, and he says the Shema.
Great. We're going to hold on to that thought. I want to
Okay.
hear from Leslie. Yeah.
Okay, just you know, when you're not really practicing Jew, you know, there's certain prayers everyone knows. So even if he says, I can't remember, I'm, you know, estranged, but everybody knows that. So, you know, if you're going to grasp for something for, you know, that's the prayer. It's the basic prayer.
Fantastic. So it is the, it's been called the watchword of Jewish faith, right? It's like the definitive text to say. And you may or may not be familiar that there is a prayer known as Shema al-Hamitzah, the bedtime Shema that is recited. And this bedtime Shema is also associated with a prayer called Vidui. Does anyone know what Vidui means? Maybe Ethan, I'll just ask if you mind sharing with us. Or I can keep going.
Is it Vidui is the confession on Yom Kippur?
Yes, Vidui is the confession, and we say Vidui at 2 points in our life. One, on Yom Kippur, and two, before we die. Right? Before death, you recite Vidui. And part of Vidui is not just a confession of sins, but also the recitation of the Shema. It's included in it. And so what I wanted to show us is that in Shulchan Aruch, which is a Jewish legal code, it is the last definitive, majorly agreed upon Jewish legal code. Now, more, followed letter by an Orthodox community, but it's still something that's good use to reference for Jewish practice and Jewish law. And here we have the text letting us know, for one who feels death approaching, say to them, recite the Vidui. Say to them, many have said the Vidui and not died, and many who have not said Vidui have died. In other words, don't worry about being superstitious. Don't feel like if you say Vidui, there's a chance that you would have survived, and by saying it, somehow you're dooming yourself. If you're in a situation where it feels like you might die, better to say it, because there's been plenty of people who've recited it and then lived many years. And there are also many who didn't get a chance to say it. And if one is unable to make confession with their mouth, one should confess it in their heart. Now, I couldn't find this directly in the Shulchan Aruch, but there's a version that's in books like Saying Kaddish, as well as on My Jewish Learning, which has a slightly different version of it. Anyone want to read this for me? Just because I'm getting tired of my own voice.
If you feel death approaching, recite the Vidui. Be reassured by those around you. Many have said the Vidui and not died, and many have not said the Vidui and have died. If you are unable to recite it aloud, say it in your heart. And if you are unable to recite it, others may recite it with you or for you.
Great. Thank you. So if you can't say it yourself, others can say it on your behalf. So maybe what was happening with the thing is he recited Shema because it's all he remembered. And maybe he remembered a little more, and he knew that Shema was part of the deathbed confessional. And so if indeed his friend was dying, this was something he could say in order to hopefully get confession and atonement for his friend. And hence, Mr. Scheckerberg, who's much more knowledgeable, right? He wakes up and is like, what are you doing? I'm alive. You don't need to do that, right? He gets up and knows it immediately. Yeah,
Maybe
go ahead.
connected to like the midrash of Jacob on his deathbed and saying the Shema as well.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, right. So we have, if people are familiar with this midrash, there's this idea that when Yaakov is sitting on his bed, surrounded by all 12 of his sons, Dina was there as well, he's surrounded by his children, and he's reciting to them, right? The midrash sort of makes it like he's panicked that his sons aren't going to understand, what's happening, or that his sons aren't going to continue the relationship with God. And of course, one of Jacob's other names is Israel, and hence his sons say to him, listen, Dad, Shema Yisrael. Enough already, Dad. We get it. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai. Adonai is our God. Adonai is one. That's what you're trying to tell us. And Jacob, so relieved, right, recites in barely a whisper, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchut Le'olam Va'ed, and then expires and dies. And that midrash is often used as an explanation why, I don't know whether your synagogue has this practice or not, many people will recite the second line of Shema as barely a whisper and not out loud in sort of honor of this midrash. Okay, we've just done a lot. We dug in. Any thoughts on either what we saw with the thing or this text about the vidui and its connection? We'd just love to hear from, again, maybe 2 to 3 people, if anyone has anything they'd like to say before moving forward. Maybe I'll also ask, I spoke with Ethan and we talked about this being interactive, and I realize it's mostly been presentational, but if people are good with that, if they're finding it interesting, can I just get a thumbs up so I know, like, great, because I'm happy to switch gears. Okay, I'm seeing lots of thumbs. Wonderful. All right, so in that case, last chance for any burning things to share, and if not, I'm going to move forward.
I think the in between Shema and the Baruch Shem, the 2 different parts, is pretty fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Is that the what's the next word? Or I'm not sure exactly what to say, or is it I'm going to lower my voice a little bit, and maybe I'm reading into the comic book a little too much, but like more of a hum or something like that.
Right. I mean, that's great. What you're doing that I love is exactly what I love to do, which is, in a way, I don't really treat the comic books like Torah, but I want to interpret them in a somewhat similar way, and it's open. I love that we have these possibilities. Is it because he's straining to remember? Is it to take a moment? And I love that reading, Ethan, of like, the is to lower his voice so that he can actually say it in a lower voice. That I never thought of that. That's such a great take on it. And I think, like all art, part of the beauty is, regardless of whether or not this was the author's intent, it's out there now and we can take it in this way. And one of the reasons I'm excited sharing it with you all is I'm also wondering what it might look like one day to use this as a way to engage people. And, you know, my Moshe House audience is a little older, right? But like, what would it look like to do Jewish learning with kids where we get to read these comic books and then have very serious Jewish discussions, right? What would it be like to connect these things? What was that?
I think it's wonderful having grandchildren who love graphic comics, that to interject a variety of different religions as a learning aspect. I mean, I love that this is a Jewish aspect, but to, you know, as we're living in a world with such conflict, to learn a little bit about everything that's out there would be a very enriching and enlightening.
Great.
You know, trying to understand, you know, maybe you have the Muslim and the Christian sharing their words and saying, and then having the comparison of what they mean would just be kind of a normal of understanding.
Yeah. That is a beautiful, beautiful utopian vision, and I love that idea. And 2, just so people know, one of the popular new characters created by Marvel Comics within the past 5 years is a Pakistani Muslim American girl named Kamala Khan, who becomes a superhero named Miss Marvel. And in the comic, it teaches people about a lot of Muslim traditions. She lives in New Jersey. I think she's actually in Jersey City. So we've got some New Jersey representation. And in some of the issues that came out, I think around 2 years ago, she ends up meeting and befriending a young Orthodox Jewish boy named Naftali, and the 2 of them bond over their kosher and halal diets. And they get together every Wednesday to have sandwiches. And this is in a comic book, right? That you see, it's exactly that. She has this multicultural friend group, and we see the, like I said, Pakistani Muslim American girl and the Orthodox yeshiva boy hanging out on the pages of the superhero comic. It's amazing.
It's fabulous.
Let's keep going. So just to show you, 4 years later, the writer Dan Slott and Thing had a solo series. He ended up writing The Thing getting his own bar mitzvah. So this is just a one-page image to show you. He's there at shul. The Fantastic Four is with him. And you don't see the whole picture, but it was like this huge 2-page spread, and there's all these superheroes sitting in a synagogue. It may or may not look like synagogues that are familiar to you. My only critique of it is that rather than a Torah portion, he gave his parsha on the book of Jonah, or he gave his sermon on the book of Jonah. Fine. Or maybe it was Job. Regardless, not something you'd really see usually at a bar mitzvah, but amazing to see the Torah there, amazing to see this hero doing this. And then just a year and a half ago, I guess, in December 2018, a story was written called 4-Minute Warning. That was a big deal because The Thing was getting married. And getting married to this woman known as Alicia Masters. So just to give credit where credit's due, written by Dan Slott, penciled and inked by Aaron Cooter, colored by Marde Garcia and Eric Arciniega, lettered by VC's Joe Caramagna, and edited by Tom Brevoort and Alana Smith. And this was volume 6 of Fantastic Four, number 5. But first, I just want to show everybody, as I'm trying
It reminds me a little bit of Beauty and the Beast.
It's very Beauty and the
Take
Beast.
off.
Yeah, 100%.
He's wearing a tallis.
Yes. So I just want to point out, this comic came out not only in December, but it came out the week leading into Christmas. And as you can imagine, in an industry, comic books come out every week on a Wednesday. And that week, it happened to be almost no comics came out. There were only a handful, and one of the only comics that came out the week of Christmas, December 2018, was this comic that prominently featured a Jewish superhero wearing a yarmulke and a tallis at his wedding, right? It's amazing to see that. And what I want to show you is, as part of, because they keep canceling the series and renumbering and going back, it's number 5 of this volume, but it's the 650th issue of Fantastic Four ever. So it's this big deal, and they did alternate covers. They did about a dozen alternate covers, but I just want to show you a few of them.
It looks like the burning bush there too.
Yes, yeah, a little bit.
A little bit around it.
Yeah. So here's another take, once again, and kippah. Here's another cover, different art style. Once again, not only that, you can see they're under a chuppah. Right? And then this is Alex Ross, another one. All these super heroics surrounding them of different heroes and villains they've associated with over the decades. And in the middle, very prominently, a kippah on Benjamin J. Grimm. So just sort of going back. So out of a dozen covers, 4 of them prominently featured this character wearing a yarmulke, right? It's
so cool.
It's so neat to see. And in the book itself, so I'll go back for a second, they're getting ready for the wedding. Everything's going off fine. And then, of course, Dr. Doom, who's one of their villains, starts doing something, and the world's under attack, and they're worried they're going to have to go off and fight in the middle of the wedding. And then Mr. Fantastic, his best friend, reveals, as a wedding gift, he built him this time device. You can see, Dad, is that a kernel display? They're under the chuppah, and basically they get surrounded by a bubble, because again, this is comic books, we get fun sci-fi things, that freezes time. And under this bubble, so only for those standing there and those under the chuppah, time is frozen, while everyone else is frozen, but they get to keep moving. And it's a 4-minute time bubble, enough time to wrap it up. I see Leslie's raised the hand. Leslie, is this urgent for this page, or can I finish what I'm saying?
I think keep on going and then we'll come back.
Great. So just to show, I'm skipping over the inside, but you see the rabbi officiates. Also, there is a rabbi, officiates, they get to the wedding, and then we get to the very end where, by the way, I just want to point out, I don't know if it's better on the next slide or this one. What I love that this comic did is it took a Jewish conception of a chuppah. And for those of you who've been under the chuppah, you probably know the chuppah is this magical place under which time gets a little funky. And they literalized it into this magical place where time is frozen all of a sudden. And then, of course, at the end we get here, it is said that at our weddings, the crash of the glass ends the hush of mythic time. Time's frozen, and hush of mythic time under a chuppah, allowing the world and the new beginning to come rushing in. Never before has that been more true. And then the thing smashes the glass, and right as the bubble ends and time resumes, and we have them all shouting, Mazel Tov! Once again, amazing to see. And if that language was familiar to anyone, I just found this very funny. The crash of glass ends the hush of mythic time under the chuppah, and the world rushes in. Everyone exhales, claps, and shouts, Mazel Tov. The celebration begins. What is this an excerpt from? Anita Diamond's The Jewish Wedding Now. If you look inside, I promise you, you will find those exact words. So this comic book writer, as his research, took Anita Diamond's book, looked it up, found this, and then wrote it in as the script in the comic book. I'm not doing this to point out, maybe he should have given some credit to it, but like, I just think it's really neat to be able to see that. Leslie, what were you gonna bring up to us? You gotta unmute yourself again.
There. Just one little comment, but all this good symbolism, so symbolism means something, and yet the button has a cross on it.
Where are you pointing to? Which one?
The previous one, the button there, the button. Yeah, see that top?
That's actually a number 4 because they're the Fantastic Four. You just can't see because of the way he's pushing it. Yep. Okay. Yep. But fair enough, right? And that is his non-Jewish friend. So, there's joining it. So we have this incredible imagery. It's pretty, again, I find it amazing. And I want to check on time. Yeah, we've got the time. I'd love to show you one more character. DC's Batwoman. There have been multiple Batwomen. This is the most recent one. If any of you are fans of the CW television, there was recently a Batwoman series that started. Pretty striking image, pretty striking reds. This art by J.H. Williams III, who's a favorite of mine. He does gorgeous, right? Like we were saying earlier, wow, someone who can actually draw with anatomy, like gorgeous, gorgeous drawings. So Batwoman debuted as a character, I think around 2006. And shortly thereafter, in 2009, in Detective Comics, maybe she debuted in 2008. This is Detective Comics number 860. This is an inside, and this is Kate Kane, the Batwoman, in her origin story, coming home. I just wanted to show this panel because we see her getting home from a workout, and you can see that she has in her home a Judaica corner. She's got Shabbos candles, she's got a Hanukkah, and does anyone know what this is right above here?
Kabbalistic.
Gene has it here, and then
Yeah, that's a Kabbalistic depiction of creation, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Now, isn't it the Shekinah?
the Sephirot, right?
Yeah, it's the Sphirot. It's the Kabbalistic Sphirot, the 10 emanations by which God created the universe, the 10 emanations of God. This one down here at the bottom, that's Shekhinah. It's associated with Shekhinah. This one in the middle is Tiferet, by the way. And not only is this like, so this one was written by Greg Rucka. He's one of my favorite Jewish writers, incredible writer. Not only this, but later on in the same comic, we see her father gifts her this costume, and we find out the colors, red and black. Gevura, one of the Sphirot, the pillar of severity, the colors of war. It's been written into this comic that her color scheme is because of Kabbalistic reasons, right? Not just Jewish, but Jewish mysticism. And I just wanted to...
Oh, okay, I was going to ask you to talk a little bit more about those.
Yeah, yep. So just to show everybody, once again, in Kabbalah, which is just one branch of many of Jewish mysticism, there's basically this idea, if I were to ask you, and I'm not going to take the time because I'm sensitive to the fact we don't have too much time, but what I like to ask my students when we're looking at the creation story is, what existed before God created light? What existed before God started creating? And if you actually pay attention to the text, it mentions a few things, but even if not, just from the beginning, Breshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created. If nothing else, what existed before creation? God. God must have existed. If there's a creator, the creator existed before creation. So the branch of Jewish mysticism known as Kabbalah understands that before creation, there was just an oneness that was God. And then God created by essentially, the best word I have is emanating, flowing out into the world in different ways. And they draw it in something that is sometimes called a tree of life, a Kabbalistic tree, or a person. The idea is that this is the head, Keter literally means crown. These are the arms, this is the body, these are the legs. We're not going to get into the middle there, but we have a human being essentially. And so in these sphirot, it begins with Keter, and Keter is like the barest point of creation, the very beginning, but it's the ruler of all that will be, right? It is the crown that marks God as ruler. And then in deciding to create the world, God has chokhmah, or wisdom, meaning it also kind of represents the process of thinking and ideas. Like you get an idea, you get a snap of inspiration, you have an idea to do something. That rough idea is chokhmah, is wisdom. And Bina, understanding, is like the lattice work. It's the plans. It's like not just the idea, but this is how I'm going to enact my idea. And those three emanations are known as the upper sphirot. And then you have a lower 7 sphirot that are the actual doing of creation, as opposed to just the idea of creation. Just a fun fact that I always love to teach when I get into sphirot. There are 7 lower sphirot. What else are there 7 of in Judaism or just in life? I promise it's simpler than you think.
Days of the week.
Days of the week. Yes, indeed. Days of creation. Yes. So the lower 7 sphirot represent the days of the week and the days of creation. Chesed is day 1. Chesed is all of God's love and grace and kindness. Gevura, which is sometimes called Deen. Gevura means strength or power, and Deen means judgment. Deen usually meaning essentially, when you say judgment, you can kind of think, oh, I'm worried I'm going to be judged badly, right? So there's the strictness to it. And also you'll see here in this chart that Deen is sometimes represented through the color red. We have that here. Fun fact, the second day of creation is the only day in the list of the days of creation that doesn't say kitov, that doesn't say that it was good. Hence why that is the somewhat negative day of judgment. And then Tiferet, the third day, which is also considered the balancing of love and power. The third day of creation has Kitov written twice, because that's how good a day it is. Netzach and Hod are generally considered aspects of prophecy, eternity, and splendor. Yesod is the foundation associated with Joseph, associated with covenant. And Shekhinah is God's feminine aspect, which is the 7th day, which is Shabbat, right? So Shekhinah is represented with Shabbat. And also, if any of you have ever, while sitting during Kabbalah Shabbat services and listening to L'cha Dodi, looked at the English translations, you may know that the second stanza of L'cha Dodi begins by saying, or ends by saying, let's say, Likrat Shabbat lechu v'necha, ki hi mekor habracha, merosh mikedem nesucha. From the beginning, from right at the start, it was sort of set aside. Sof ma'aseh, the last thing in creation, b'machshava techila. But in thought, it was the first. Shekhinah / Shabbat is what we're trying to get to, even though it was the last thing made. It was the first thing intended. So just like the Sphirot, Keter is the crown. It is the first thought. But all along, the plan is to get down to the kingdom that the crown can rule over. The world where everything is balanced. We just got mystical and we just got deep into Kabbalah. Wasn't sure if we would or not. I mostly just wanted us to see, as said here, that Gevura is used there. How are we doing on time at this point? We've got a bit more time. I'd love to keep going unless there's burning needs to say something. Great. All right, so the last comic I want to take us through is DC Bombshells. Now, DC Bombshells is comic books sometimes put out comics that are alternate universes, meaning they're not mainstream continuity. There's the idea that like a comic from 1972 and a comic from today are technically in continuity, meaning we've seen the characters evolve and change over the decades. This is an alternate history reimagining where instead of superheroes existing in the modern day, they exist in the 1940s, specifically in World War II in Europe. And it's basically a group of, in this particular case, mostly female superheroes fighting against Nazis in World War II. Which has its ties, for anyone who's read The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, to a lot of the beginning of comic books where it was Jewish power fantasy of creating these superheroes who could fight Hitler and the Nazis. So this issue came out in November 2016, DC Bombshells number 17, written by Marguerite Bennett, penciled and inked by Sandy Jarrell and Mirka Andolfo, colored by Kelly Fitzpatrick and Wendy Broom, lettered by Wes Abbott and edited by Jessica Chen. You may notice it's mostly female creators. That was intentional. The whole idea of DC Bombshells was behind also like female empowerment with this. Here's what I would love to do. we are going to be introduced shortly to two characters. One who is the 1940s version of Batwoman, the character we're looking at, and one who's the little girl. I would love to get two brave readers who would be willing to read their dialogue, because I think the most effective thing would be to just go panel to panel and seeing their dialogue. Can I get those readers at the ready?
Ronnie, can you be a reader? And maybe, who else? Susan, can you read? 16? Oh, Sharon, sorry, Sharon. Or Susan, do you want, is that okay, Susan, or you want to do it? Okay, Sharon, you can read the other part.
All right, so who are our two readers, Sharon and?
Ronnie.
Great, Ronnie, I'm gonna ask you to be Batwoman and Sharon to be the little girl. Okay.
Oh,
Is that okay? We'll go against, yeah. So I'm going to start off here. Well, I'll show you where to begin. Basically, this is before a big battle, and these superheroes have found a Jewish family that they're hanging out with. But for tonight, we are going to remember what it means to live. And so we see these women preparing, to have real wine again. And that green woman brought wheat for bread. All right, so here's our little girl, and then that's Batwoman.
are you scared?
Yes.
It's just Shabbat dinner.
You're funny, Mama Love.
So I'm going to move this to the top so it's not being blocked, or to the bottom so it's not being blocked. I always forget how to do it though. Boom. Okay, great.
Go. I'm scared for you and for my friends. What is that?
Oh, it's going to go scared for you and your friends, and then we'll go to our next reader and then back. Yep.
Okay.
We're going to follow it down. Yeah.
So do I read all the bubbles?
Yep. My mouse will follow along with you.
Okay. You shouldn't be scared. I've been scared before. I was scared in marching band. All those people looking up at me, judging me. But I love music so much, and after a while, I wasn't scared anymore. And you shouldn't be scared either.
Why is that?
You're with us, and we're with you. Our women have been in a lot worse before.
Is that so?
This is the little girl.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, the prayer says, may God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Yismik Elohim Kisara, Rivka, Rachel, Valea.
Yisim Elohim Kesara.
Kisara, Rivka, Rachel, Valea.
Kesara, Rivka, Rachel, Valea.
Good.
Right. So just to point out, we literally just spent an entire panel having this little girl correct the Hebrew pronunciation of Batwoman to recite the prayer. If people recognize it, it's the prayer that parents use to bless their daughters on Friday night at Shabbat, right? We use, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh for sons, as prayer for our daughters. Okay.
And you don't know how ironically funny it is that I'm correcting Ron.
We're not going there. It's very cute.
Let's keep going.
Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah are our mothers, but there are so many heroines to admire or remember or be like. There's Deborah. She was a warrior and a prophet.
Is that the girl?
A lot going on for you. Yeah, I think
it's okay.
Yep.
She incited rebellion too because of the mistreatment of the Jews, and she killed a terrible enemy with her own hands, and she brought peace for 40 years. Or there's Judith. She was a beautiful widow all alone in the world, except for one handmaiden. Together they ingratiated themselves with the wicked king Holofernes. They let him think the Jewish They let him think the Jewish people were weak and that they could be destroyed. And while he was drunk and pleased with himself and thinking about how easy we would be to kill, Judith and her handmaiden cut off his head.
Right. So we've got a reference to Deborah from the book of Judges. We've got a reference to Judith from the pseudepigrapha, Second Temple period literature. Let's keep going just a little bit more.
They were both heroines, even if the handmaiden doesn't get a name.
What's your name then?
Miriam Batzel, Miriam, like Moses' sister, she was a prophet too, and they say because of her, no women worshiped the golden calf in the desert. She stayed true, and she led other women too.
You know so much.
Indeed, she does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so had we all the time in the world, right? I did some looking. I tried my best to find that midrash about Miriam. What I do have is we do have midrashim that say, indeed, that women did not participate in the worship of the golden calf, and their reward for that was Rosh Chodesh. So we have this text, and maybe in another world we could look at that. And I just want to go ahead. I just would love for us to finish it so we can get the power of the end of this exchange. So our two lovely readers have been doing so well. If you wouldn't mind reading just a tiny bit more, and then we'll bring it to a close. So here we are.
That's Susan, it's you.
Oh, the right. They want me to hate that I am a Jew, but I am proud. What they think is a shameful thing is what makes me strong. I can remember that I come from so much courage and so much strength. They will never make me ashamed.
Where I'm from, I know this is my blood, but I don't know the words. It's just a part of who I am. I don't know the prayers. I don't know the stories.
That's okay. I can tell you the stories. Maybe there will be stories about you one day.
Please, God, not another red cap, not another Jason, or you.
Or you. And then they all gather together, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, as they have the Shabbos candles lit. It just does something for me when I see this. Oops. It just does something for me. It's so powerful. It's so incredible to know that people might encounter this in this way. As you saw, we could read this page and then learn about Judith, about Deborah, about that text. And what I would love to finish with is immediately when we saw this version of Batwoman saying, I don't know it. It's just part of who I am, but I don't know this stuff. I don't know the prayers. I don't know the stories. And this beautiful, maybe there'll be stories about you one day. My mind immediately leapt. I don't know if Marguerite Bennett, the author, intended this or not, but immediately my mind leapt to one of my favorite Hasidic stories that I want to share with you to bring us to a close. So I'm going to minimize this and read it with you all. This is the version as told by Yisrael Campbell, a wonderful Orthodox comedian, actually. And I'm just trying to move. All right, great. When the Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the Jews, he would go to a certain part of the forest and meditate. There he would say a certain prayer and light a fire, and the miracle would be accomplished, the danger averted. In the next generation, the Maggid of Mezrich would go to the same place in the forest and say, Master of the universe, I don't know how to light the fire, but I can still say the prayer. And it was enough. And still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov would go to the forest and he would say, I don't know how to light the fire, and I don't know how to say the prayer, but I know the place, and that must be sufficient. And it was. And still later, generations later, when it fell to Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin, sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he would say, Master of the universe, I don't know how to light the fire, and I don't know how to say the prayer, and I don't know where the place is in the forest. All I can do is tell the story. And it was enough. And what I hope we see is that regardless of the way it's told, the story can be enough and it can be powerful. And I love coming back to comic books over and over again to see how they tell our story of being Jewish. thank you all so much for joining me tonight and hopefully learning with me and being a part. If anyone has maybe like the tiniest bit for Q&A, if they'd like, since we have maybe like over 3 minutes or so, and if not, thank you for joining us. I don't know, Ethan.
Yeah, I think we have a little time if anyone has any questions.
Great.
Wait. I'm happy to open it up for questions. Yeah, Hannah.
How was it the first, what was that, the thing, when that Jewish reference was made, was that the first time that was in a public consumption comic book? How was it received by the readers who were not Jewish? Did it get good reception? Did it get, like, what kind of reception did it get?
Yeah, so I've been asked the same question before, and clearly I'm going to have to go and try and do a bit more research. I honestly don't know. I mean, it is considered a landmark issue of the series and a pretty important one because it confirms he's Jewish. So I suppose even for people who aren't Jewish, that's still an important thing. Mostly I've just heard other Jews talking about how cool it is. There's a pretty wonderful blog post that I've encountered once of a father talking about how he didn't care so much until he had that kid reading comics, and the moment he told his kid, like, the thing's Jewish like us, kid's eyes lit up and he was so engaged. So I know, for Jewish people, it's amazing. For those who aren't Jewish, I think it was just like a neat or interesting thing, right? Like most people I meet who aren't Jewish generally have some level of curiosity and want to know more and ask about it. So I don't have, unfortunately, specifics. And I'll also say that was the confirmation of the thing being Jewish. There's certainly comics, even from the 80s, that have Jewish content that did predate it. That was just, that wasn't the first Jewish content in a comic. It was just the first time for the thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Wasn't the first commercial comic The Phantom? And wasn't the writer of The Phantom a guy named Lee Falk, and wasn't he Jewish?
The Phantom was certainly one of the older ones. That is beyond my current scholarship. I don't know for sure what the oldest one is. I know that there's a bit of a debate over how, like, some people would argue you could go back to Egyptian hieroglyphics and that those were comic books, and right, yeah. Like there's a really wonderful one. I don't know if you're familiar with Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, which is a fantastic essay about comic books in the form of a comic book. It's a real mind blower. So I don't know. It's possible. The Phantom and those pulp heroes were certainly some of the earliest comic books, right? And like the superhero boom didn't start till 1939. 38 and Superman. So maybe it would have been. Yeah, there's definitely been Jews. I'd have to look into it, but I believe you if you're saying it.
But he also had the tight suit and the mask, which kind of made me, think that it was a predecessor of Batman, Superman, and some of the other.
Yes, definitely a lot of that. Why did I just blank on the term? But a lot of those pulp, right? A lot of those pulp heroes. Yeah, like they were predecessors for superheroes, definitely. Like the genre was in its prototype stages before coming into being.
Do you think these creators created these as a way to fight anti-Semitism, or has there been scholarly work on the reasons why they add the Jewish aspects of these characters into it's not for the consumption of Jewish readers, so it must be for
right. So I'll say in the beginning, by which I mean like those early comic creators, they were not having explicit Judaism in the comics, but it's pretty well known, I think, that likely a lot of those superheroes were, again, power fantasies, and that's explored in Cavalier and Clay, even though that's a fictional book. The idea being that these Jews who were in America and powerless to stop what was happening in Europe could write these fantasies of characters. It's not so different from the power fantasy of Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, for anyone who saw that film, which is a reimagining of the Holocaust, or B.
Oh yes.
Or B. Some people approach the Book of Esther and the Purim story, especially when you get into those questionable chapters at the end and the murder that happens. Like, is that really what happened, or is that a power fantasy? So that was the beginning. as far as I'm aware, the earliest form of Jewish content in comic books was actually a means to talk about the Holocaust. And I don't remember the name of the book, but I could get it to you. There's a really wonderful book that just recently came out exploring the role of comic books in advancing conversation about the Holocaust. Because as many of you may know, in the first decades following, survivors were reticent to say anything. No one wanted to talk about it. And it was actually through comic books that there were a lot of stories of survivors or what happened in the camps or in Auschwitz. And that came, there's a very famous Batman issue called, I think, Night of the Stalker maybe, where a Holocaust survivor is hunting down and killing Nazis and Batman's stopping him, and there's this sort of moral confrontation. So the Shoah, the Holocaust, was actually an early way that it came in, not anti-Semitism this way. But afterwards, I think what ended up happening was, as there was a little bit more modern creators grew up seeing that, and they were like, I just want to see myself, right? Dan Slott has a really great interview where he talks about when he was growing up. He's the one who wrote The Thing's Wedding and The Thing's Bar Mitzvah. When he was growing up, there weren't really Jewish superheroes, or like one of them was Moon Knight, who, as I said, Moon Knight's an interesting character, and I showed him at the beginning, but he's also a mercenary who, in the issue that showed his Judaism, he like attacked his own father. That's not a good role model, right? So like some of it is like these like authors coming up and they're like, we want better role models, we want better representation. So as far as I know, it's more been a story of increasing comfort and representation, not combating anti-Semitism, although certainly that's, you know, one of the most powerful Jewish content pieces that I've yet to cover. So Henry and I, who I showed you at the beginning, we do a podcast that comes out where we cover this kind of stuff. Everything I shared with you is material we've covered in our podcast. It's called Funny They Don't Look Jewish, if anyone wants to listen, if you like it. One of the issues we're planning to cover is a 4-issue series of Magneto, the prominent villain of the X-Men films, played by Ian McKellen, and I'm blanking right now on the wonderful other actor who plays him in later movies, but Magneto is known to have grown up to have experienced the camps in Auschwitz. And a non-Jewish writer named Greg Pak wrote this incredible 4-issue series called Magneto Testament that is advertised as a superhero comic, but is actually just an illustrated comic showing life in the camps and in Auschwitz. Yes, Michael Fassbender was the other actor playing him. So it's certainly been used for educational purposes, which, you know, educating people about Jews is arguably one way of fighting anti-Semitism. I've probably done too much to answer you at this point, Ethan.
Yeah.
Do you consider Mouse by Spiegelman to be a comic book?
I consider it to be a graphic novel, definitely. Yeah.
What's the difference between a graphic novel and a comic book?
So I'm sure you ask a dozen different people, they'll have different answers. For me personally, I would define terminology like this. A comic book is usually one issue, often of a serialized nature, that tends to be around 22 to 32 pages. So you'll have issue number 1, issue number 2, etc. A collection of many comic books, such that you could read an entire story, because comics, much like serialized fiction or books that you used to get, right? We know that Dickens and others used to write in serialized fashion. The magazine would come out and you get part 1, and then you wait a month and you get part 2, etc. So comics were originally written in a very serialized fashion. So if you get a collection collecting anywhere from 6 to 12 issues all in one, I would call that a trade paperback, which is sort of a publishing term for a collection of many comic books, but they originally were all published as single issues. A graphic novel is what I would call usually a self-contained work of longer length that is telling often a more mature story. So there's original graphic novels of the X-Men, for example, that are one and done stories, but rather than being 22 to 32 pages, it's maybe 64 pages. So it's a bit more substantive, a bit more bang for your buck. But then there's things like Mouse, right, which is, I think, 200 pages. I forget how many pages.
That's different books of it.
Right, exactly. So I think graphic novel is a term I use for something that someone intentionally created as a longer piece. It's sort of like graphic novels are novels as opposed to the short story collections that are trade paperbacks and comic books. That might be a not perfect, but
if you haven't read John Lewis's graphic novel of March, is pretty powerful.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually on my shelf. I've yet to read it, but I'm excited to read it. Yeah.
Great. I think we have time for one more question or any other conversations with Brandon. Well, as you can see, I am lucky to call Brandon my friend, but also my teacher. I've learned a tremendous amount from him, not just tonight, which I'm not a comic book person, but now I might have to go get some and check them out, but also throughout my studies. So I'm so glad that I can welcome him to Temple Emanu-El in Westfield and continue to learn with him. And maybe Brandon will get you back another time. Now that we're virtual, it's really easy to do some of these exciting things. And so hopefully we can find the time to do that again. But this was different for us as well. We don't always get to talk about comic books and Judaism, which was really fun. So thank you for being with us, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thursday, if you're around, 4:30 to 5:30. The ice cream truck will be at Temple Emanu-El. So drop by and get some ice cream on Temple Emanu-El. And then hopefully services outside in Teva, which I think we could be rained out for our 6th Shabbat of the year.
So it's not just for kids?
No, it's for anyone. So kids, everyone loves ice. Everyone loves a chocolate taco or like a popsicle or something. What if you want? And it's
children of all ages.
And you can wear a mask, and we're gonna be socially distanced. But we will also have Shabbat on Friday, hopefully outside, but it's not looking great either. But thank you, Brandon, for just joining us and teaching us. I think I can say I think we all learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Stay healthy, everybody.
Have a good evening.